GraphQL. This is the elevator pitch. It is a query language for your API. It all sounds super fancy, but the coolest part is right here. GraphQL provides a complete and understandable description of your data and API, and it gives clients the power. So really all that means is your client is actually defining the shape of the data it wants back when it's requesting a payload. And that's really I think the coolest part about GraphQL. GraphQL started at Facebook in 2012, got open sourced in 2015. If you really want to know more about it, there's a cool documentary made by Honeypot. It's 30 minutes, it's pretty cool. They also do one on Elixir, so if you're into Elixir, I know some people here are. They also do one on Elixir, so that's enough of that. They also have their spec out. If you are bored one night and drink a little bit too much, you can go through the spec. It's not quite RFC level boring, but it's a spec. So GraphQL itself, since it's just a spec, there's tons of different implementations. All it really means is there's a server-side implementation, there's client-side implementations. The actual type definition that you see right here, this is the big part of it. This is the contract between the server and the client. This is saying, when you request this type, this is the field. These are the fields I'm going to give you back, and these are the types they're going to be. So server-side implementations include all these different types of languages. There used to be only a few. Now there's pretty much every single one. Lisp isn't on there, unfortunately. Sorry. Clojure's on there. It's getting big. Client-side implementation, there's a bunch of them. But there's also, if you don't have any interest in actually making the server-side, like actually hooking up the database and everything, you can do something called like with Prisma, or I've used Hasura before, and that actually will stand up a database for you, and you kind of get your own CMS. And so you get a GraphQL API that you can build your front end with without having to do any of the server-side coding. So if you want to play with it, those are really awesome choices. A lot of them are deployed at Heroku, so they're pretty cool. So just getting into it, this is a playground that pretty much shipped with every single framework that implements the GraphQL API, or the spec, sorry. This is really cool. This is like if you've ever used Postman to debug REST APIs, this is kind of the same thing, along with if you bundled Postman with Swagger. So Swagger's like your documentation, maybe not. This kind of all in one encompassing place. And the cool thing about this is it's actually auto-completing. So if you have a schema, you can just start hacking away at exactly what you want back. So right away I can define exactly what I want back from the server, and it'll give me back the exact fields I want. So if I want the age of the cat, they'll start just showing up immediately. Now say there's like some friends that are cats, and I want to know their name and their color. Immediately I get to define the exact shape of the data I want back. So in each payload there's a data key. So this is when it's successful, you get data back. So now let's, I don't know, take off the E. So now we get the errors key back, and it'll send back the message, and it'll say, cannot query field nam on type cat, did you mean name? So right away, you get some pretty good feedback. If you're the type of person that likes to look at documentation, when you start defining your types and your queries, it's all self-documenting. So as you build up your GraphQL schema, you're actually doing the documentation at the same exact time. So no more, did you update the Swagger docs? Did you update whatever? A wiki, Confluence page, whatever you want. So it's pretty cool. If you want to dive more into it, you can see, on friends, there's this type and this type. And then there's also this notion of, I don't know, you can go into friends, which is a list of cats, and you can see which friends are, you can already see like it becomes like a really nested loop. So in here, let's say I wanted to do something like, I want the cats that have the color white, and I want their age. And then I guess I want their name. It's like, okay, so these are the white cats, catties. And so now immediately the field becomes white cats. And so you can request black cats. So this is called aliasing, and it's just piggybacking off of, you know, things. Sorry, typing and talking at the same time is really hard. So this is, if you had some sort of like comparison field, you could do this and submit 2 queries in one payload to the server, and get back 1 response. And the server side does all the work. But now we start noticing that we have duplicate fields. Let's just do friends again with name. That way we can have more fields. So now we can see we have a lot of repeated fields here, and we could do something like this. So now we can create a fragment on type cat, fragment cat fields. And I can put this in here, and I can actually, I think that's right. This is called a fragment, but I can do cat fields, and it'll actually give me back the same thing. And then I can change things down here. I don't want friends to come back. I want his friends to be homies. You know, really fun things like that. They're really cool. Aside from that, we can start naming our operations. So we can call this the cat query. And we can say the color is a string, and then the color here is gonna be of color. This is really weird. I know it is. I'm actually gonna delete the fragment. This is all client-side stuff. So this is actually stuff you would be doing in your React app or your Gatsby, wherever. You would do this here in this development environment to test out your query first. And then literally you're just gonna copy this and drop it into wherever you're submitting that GraphQL query. So query variables, since I set one up here called color, it's just a JSON payload. And so now you can start doing things like that. What? Oh, sorry. That's cool. Is that supposed to go off? Stressing me out. So now this code can kind of just live there, and then you can just change the variable wherever you see dynamically. Also, you can do things like include if, I don't know, true. We'll just say false. If, forgot about this. These are called directives. You can do this on the fly. So if you make this a variable, you can include fields dynamically now. Those are pretty cool. But aside from that, this is all the client-side stuff. But what's really interesting is how this is actually happening. So if you think about it, you would think this is like a really weird, complex query that's being sent to the server side. If you look at it, I'm just going to get rid of this. This is the entire query. So it's literally a JSON payload with the query key, and then this all this inside on the left side, stringified. So you've got your new lines and everything. So there's not a whole lot of crazy magic going on. It's literally just a post request with a string. So I'm not really sure where to go from there. I'm kind of winging it. Oh yeah, that's the other thing. So if you're used to REST, you have your get, you have your put, you have your delete, post. There's so many others. With GraphQL, you only have one endpoint. It's a post. Usually, you can implement it as whatever you want, but it's a post usually with at the endpoint /GraphQL. So when you're actually developing this on the server side, no longer are you thinking about what route do I put this under? Is this a put? Is this a delete? Is this a get? Those are all my frustrations with REST, but that's why. So aside from that, we can start updating this. So Oh no. That's top secret Walmart Labs stuff. Don't look at it. So this right here is the type definition that is being used on the front end. And look at the schema, it's the exact same thing. So we can start live updating this. So in your GraphQL, you can start saying things like, this is the description for the cat. We'll save that, refresh this, and then we can start looking at, so right in one place we're defining our schema, the descriptions, any sort of notes we want to make on there. Let's say the age is deprecated, because we don't want to give away the cat's age anymore because it's sensitive. And right away we kind of get that. Oh, see, deprecated, no longer supported. So right away you're just giving feedback back to the client. So the server-side implementation, it can look a bit complex and scary if you look at the documentation, but really all it is it's a map. It's called a resolver map. So your resolvers are just functions that are fired. So right here, this is calling the cat's query. All it's doing is firing the cat's function. So inside of type query, we have our query name cats. But if you look right here, it's just a mapping. So all it's doing is firing off a function that you called from the front end. And there's some stuff that gets passed in. The parent, on the first resolver that gets called, it's always null, because it's who is ever calling that function. And then arguments. So like earlier I passed in color. That's another argument. And then right here is how I was calling his homies, his friends. This is called the nested resolver. So on type cat, I have a resolver type for friends, and I pass in his cat, and then I return his friends. But all this is really is, you're just creating maps to functions. The same thing with, so in GraphQL there's three types of queries. There's queries, those are like your gets in REST. Mutations, those are all your mutations, so that's your put, delete, post. But really all they are, they're just functions. Convention says all your mutations happen on your mutation functions, and queries happen with queries. And then there's subscriptions, and those are just sockets. So if you have a field that you want the server to push a notification to the client when it's ready, you would use a subscription for that, but I'm not going to show that because it's kind of crazy. So there was something I wanted to show because I'm kind of excited about it. I think it was like 2 times ago, 2 meetups ago, somebody showed the Pokemon API. I can't remember who it was, but I thought it was really cool. But it's only in REST. So I thought, how cool would it be if I could contact stop it. If I could hit a REST API and then return the data. So let's refresh this, and let's say Pokemon ID is 1. We'll say name. We'll say height. And then we have Pokemon. And so this is actually hitting the Poke API. So what's really cool is the client doesn't really care what they're getting passed back, but you can start looking at their docs and start building out your schema. So you're like, so if we look at the schema, we have, these are all your types. And we start mirroring it the same way. And then if you want to have nested Pokemon final, let's hope this works. So now we have his abilities, which are a different type. And so now we can start, so we got to refresh. So now we can start doing like abilities. And what do we get in abilities? Well, there's an ID and a name, and it's hidden. And then we start getting nested resolver calls to an API. And this is a lot more intuitive for somebody trying to build a Pokedex. I don't know. It could be really cool. So yeah, this is exciting for me. Stupid stuff like this. Turning not a legacy REST API, but into something easier to digest for different clients, a la Gatsby, whatever you want. Yeah, so that was me kind of showing a rough overview of GraphQL. I don't know how long that was. I hope it was close to the 20-minute mark. If you guys have any questions, I can try to answer them. But thank you.
Any questions? Oh, wow. The lights came on.
You guys are GraphQL
Wait,
experts?
we have a question.
So does GraphQL... oh, I'm like getting stabbed in the face here. Is GraphQL like an API on its own, or does it always sit between like a REST API, or God forbid a SOAP API, and like the front end? Like, where does it live?
So GraphQL abstracts the actual data away from, it doesn't matter where it's getting it from. That's the whole purpose of it. So you could have your main data in your own database, and then you could have, I don't know, like your abilities. You could have that on a separate REST API, but you're just joining them all together in that API. So you could even be consuming another GraphQL API, and turtles all the way down, I guess. But yeah, it does not care what the data source is. It doesn't care about it, doesn't communicate it at all. It's just like, this is what I'm going to give you back, and it's the server's job to figure out how to get it. So that could be a caching layer, that could be your own database, that could be anything. Yeah. Cool.
All right. Whoa, sorry.
Whoa.
More questions? Question.
Yeah, say you had suppose you had a couple of rather different databases. Say you had Azure table storage, and then you had a SQL database, and you wanted it to all come out as a single GraphQL API. I guess you developed two completely different schemas, or rather different ones, or what would you be doing?
It depends on how you wanted to present that to the client. If they were related fields, the client shouldn't care. So if you're getting fields from one database and then slamming them together for one type because that makes sense for the user, then that's totally possible. So every field can have another resolver, can have another function that fires off. But yeah, so while you merge all your data into one place, you could be connecting to two places. But yeah. Cool, I hope that was good enough.
Any other questions? Ooh, more questions. I
Whoa.
like it.
How secure is this? If you're actually passing the query, it seems like you'd be very vulnerable to the equivalent of SQL injection attacks, where someone modifies your query or something like that and just exposes all your data.
Yeah, I think it would follow along the same principles as cleaning your data before you actually insert it anywhere. Because actually, I don't know. It's the same function as a REST API call, so you would have to do the same sort of cleaning that you would on any other request. So it's no different. It's still the same.
And I think a lot of the frameworks already do a lot of the
Probably.
cleaning for you at this point, to map it back to the database later.
Yeah, I would hope so. Cool. Thanks, guys.